Good evening, and thanks for joining us on our weekly AJA Zoom event. Welcome to any new people this week. We also have people watching on Facebook and people listening to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on j-air.com.au. Welcome, everyone. My name is Robert Gregory, and also on the screen is Dr. David Adler, the president of the AIJAC. So as our guest for tonight, all the way from Israel, Ari Briggs. We had a break of 2 weeks, and many of you contacted us because you missed your AIJA fix. So here we are. The format tonight will be a short interview, followed by the chance to ask questions. If you'd like to ask a question, the best way is to raise your hand with the reaction button. Written questions can also be placed on the chat function, and if we have a chance, we may get to some tonight. Now, Aliyah is something that most Australian Jews would have considered at one point in their lives. And our guest this evening, Ari Briggs, took the plunge, leaving Sydney and moving to the Holy Land. In the time he's been there, he's had an eventful career, working in high tech for 14 years and becoming Director of International Relations with Regavim, an organization dedicated to protecting Israel's lands that regular viewers will certainly recognize from our past AIJA events. We've had several with them. Ari's also written extensively, including for the Jerusalem Post and the Jewish Press, and has formed some very strong connections with the new Israeli government, which he may go into later. Now, Ari is going to draw on his experiences and connections to share his views on a range of major issues facing Israel today. So, Ari, thank you for joining the AIJA.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be here, Robert. Thanks, David.
Can you start by sharing a bit about your story of moving to Israel, some of your major experiences, and what are some of the challenges you've had along the way?
Sure. I just want to, we have a Sikh friend called Brad Ellerin, who also made Aliyah from Sydney. Maybe some of you know him. So I just want to do this in his honor and that he should have a refuah shalema. His name is Baruch Chaim Ben Zisla. Also made Aliyah from Sydney and currently going through chemo. Right. So yeah, thanks again. My wife and I, my wife Shuli, Nee Singer, and David, my father-in-law, is here on the call. So my wife and I made Aliyah in 1993, and I wouldn't call it a plunge. I would call it more of a jump in the air, reaching up onto a higher place. And we came when we were young, still a young couple, still with our kids. And in those days, what was traditional was to spend 6 months in Ulpan and then get on with work. I couldn't handle being in Ulpan for 6 months and jump straight into the high-tech world after a while, which was really just starting at that time. But thank God everything has gone very well. And really, you know, if I could sum it up, it's living one's dream, living one's Jewish dream to be here in Israel. Of course, many of you will know that this week is Jerusalem Day. It's actually celebrated here tomorrow, even though it's officially on Friday. And it's not a day that's randomly chosen. 56 years ago was the Six-Day War. And that was when we liberated Jerusalem. And of course, that is now and always has been our eternal and undivided capital. And that's been returned as such. So it's an amazing week. And really, there's no week goes past without something amazing happening. I remember telling myself very early on when I made Aliyah is to put those pink shaded glasses on. There are people who see bad in everything, and there are people who are optimistic and see good. So I decided I wanted to try and be one of those that see good in everything. And it's not a bad way to live by. Just in terms of, and actually a bit more about our history. This week, actually 2 days ago, we returned from a roots trip to Poland. My father, Henry Briggs, was born in Krakow, March 9th, 1939. we went back on a very much an educational tour of many locations, learned a lot with a group of 20 people from our community. And it really has only strengthened our belief that the only real way to say never again is to build a strong and proud Jewish state. And really, that's what I've dedicated my life. And of course, thanks again to my wife for letting me be crazy and do that. But really, for the last 7-8 years, I dedicated my life to helping strengthen Israel. As Robert mentioned, I worked for many years with Regavim. Regavim was founded by Bezalel Smotrich and Yehuda Eliyahu. And in those days, we always said that the major issues that Israel is facing can be solved by the government. So Regavim was a legal advocacy organization very much dedicated to saving and strengthening state lands. But the issues all had to do with government decisions. And the amazing thing is from that small NGO startup called Regavim back in 2010, today the founder, Bezalel Smotrich, is the finance minister of the state of Israel and also a minister in the defense ministry responsible for the civil administration. So those issues that we started dealing with in 2010, which included land management, including the Negev, including Judea and Samaria, including the Galil, and of course, included judicial reform. Even back in 2010, we realized it was very necessary, that needed to be judicial reform. We were taking the government to court, to the Supreme Court, to try and get it to actually implement its laws fairly and equally. And it was extremely, extremely difficult. And most people came to the conclusion that all people in Regavim obviously came to the conclusion that judicial reform was necessary to actually ensure that things are done here correctly and equally. So that was a small introduction. What I actually do today is mentor 50 of the best Zionist organizations in Israel, dealing with Aliyah, Zionist and Jewish identity, culture, education, academia, governance, immigration, law and justice, media, security, settlement and sovereignty, and Zionist land development policy. So really the run of not-for-profits or NGOs, as we call them, or amutot, as we call them here, that have a huge impact on the country. And the members of Knesset, the ministers, actually need these ex-parliamentary organizations to supply them with legislation, supply them with documents, data, papers, and knowledge. And that's what we focus on. So I'm happy to go for questions.
Yeah, so we might touch on your time at Regavim. So did anything you saw while you were there really surprise you? And what are some of the takeaways, some of the things you learned during your time there?
So as I mentioned, Regavim, their job, their role, their major role is to look after state lands. And if we call about 85% of the country's land is owned by the state. That's a combination of Kakal, JNF, which is, it's been a while. Let's say 10%, and the other 75% is actually state-owned, that was inherited from the Turkish to the British to Israel. In Judea and Samaria, of course, you have the Jordanian occupation for those, let's say 19 years, from 1948 to 1967. So the as most of the country is state land, everything that happens on that land is meant to be managed correctly and well by the government. And because it has to do with land, Regavim had to go everywhere, be everywhere. We had teams in the field, what we call the Shetach, And my role as getting this information out to the world to counter all of the lies and falsehoods that are spread by so many of our enemies, that meant that I had to know most of the issues very well to be able to speak about them. So it took me to the Galil, the Golan, all over Judea and Samaria, down to the Negev. I spoke many times about the problems in the Negev with the Bedouin takeover, and that's only got worse over the last 10, 15 years. Many people have spoken about possible policies, but really not much has been implemented. And it's becoming a more and more desperate situation. The danger on the roads, driving at night, not only from unregistered, 15, 16, 12-year-olds driving in cars, but also camels wandering on the roads. So many different issues, and it's an issue of lawlessness, where you allow lawlessness it's actually not an issue of lawlessness, it's an issue of vacuum, where the government pulls out of areas, where the government is not there enforcing its law. What happens is lawlessness. And it's really a bit like the Wild West down in the Negev today. And we're doing everything to change that. And really, you mentioned ties with the current government, the Minister of Negev and Galil, the Minister of National Priorities, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Housing. All of these ministries are extremely important. Actually, the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli, he also has the Bedouin file. He's got he's responsible for finding ways to make sure that the Bedouin are integrated and follow the law. So also another very important person that we work with.
Yes, we know Amichai Chikli well. He was an AIJAC guest speaker as well, so very good person. But turning to more recent issues, since the Israeli election, the Australian media, and even some Australian Jewish organizations, we've seen a big focus on the left-wing anti-government rallies. So how accurately do they reflect the mood of Israelis? And what are some of your impressions of the new Israeli government?
So one thing that's very important, and it's a great question, and it is, this is the issue of the day. But you only have to go back to the day after the election results came out, where each and every member of the opposition parties stood up and said, the result is unacceptable. We're going to fight this tooth and nail. Now, I don't have a problem with an active opposition. We seem to forget that only a year and a half there were previous elections, and in those elections, after 3 stalemates, the 4th election, what happened was Naftali Bennett, the head of a party of 7 and then 6 members of Knesset, became the prime minister, the first prime minister on a rotation basis, by taking his 6 seats and moving them to, let's say, the other side that most of his people that elected him did not expect him to do, especially after he stated very clearly that he wouldn't be party to such a government. That government, and we've had governments on the left and the right and the center, but the biggest problem with that government, and I have no problem with Arabs sitting in the Knesset, as long as they're not terrorist supporters, and I have no problem with even Arab parties being in government, but they cannot be the seats that will bring down a government, which means they cannot be part of the first 61. After 61, very happy to enroll them because they make up 20% of the population, and they need services and they have needs. The problem with the Bennett government was it was held hostage by RAM, which is the Islamic Brotherhood party, the Islamic movement here in Israel. And only now, even though we knew there were bad things going on, only now are things coming out which show that there was, even in the Negev, just as an example, there was a huge budget given to the Arab party RAM to help develop the Negev. but there are recordings of the head of the Ram Party, Mansour Abbas, saying that his preference is to Israeli Bedouin that did not serve in the army. And so those Bedouins that do serve in the army would normally get preference, or should normally get preference, because they've gone and dedicated their lives and risked their lives and served in the army for between 2 and 3 years, and therefore should get some preference. And he actually stated very clearly that with the government money he was getting, they were going to be at the bottom of the list. So that was just one example. And, you know, we had an active opposition against that government as well. And that government was eventually brought down because in Israel, we talk about 3 branches of government, right? We have the judicial system, we have the executive and the legislature. And everyone says, well, the legislature is really weak and the executive is very strong, and therefore we need a strong judiciary. But actually, there aren't too many countries in the world where the legislature has brought down the government so many times over Israel's 75-year history. And a good example of that is when the Bennett-Lapid government could not get 60 votes, 61 votes to pass a budget, or to face off a E'imun. E'imun is non-confidence, a no-confidence motion. They weren't able to face off a no-confidence motion, therefore the government fell. And that shows the strength of legislature. And today, the same thing is happening. There is a goal from the day this government was elected to bring it down. There are still polls done every day and released every week when it makes sense for the media, which is very much against the current government, except for Channel 14, to release those polls. And so this government has not had any time hasn't had any time to, let's say, its 100-day grace period. There was no such thing. And it's been attacked from the beginning. As I said, I don't mind democratic. This is a vibrant democracy. We have great protests. We have protesters. As long as they're not violent, as long as they don't break the law, then yeah, go on, do as much as you want. And I do believe the majority of this country do believe in the direction of the government, and that's why it was elected in elections to do and to fulfill its 4 years and fulfill its policies that it's promised its people.
And what are your thoughts on the diaspora's response to Israeli internal political issues, like, for example, judicial reform?
Yeah, I'm pretty outspoken. I don't know if anyone follows me on Facebook or don't follow me. They follow various Australian bodies, whether it be the ZFA or AIJAC. When I see these organizations posting letters, not really congratulations, but wonder or even warnings about this new government coming in, where they use falsehoods and things that have been disproved many, many times to actually, what I would say, delegitimize the democratically elected government of the State of Israel. These are meant to be our closest friends, the Zionist Federation of Australia, you know, and AIJAC, that organization that represents Australian Jewry in front of on the government level. If they don't like policies of the government, and I was a shaliach. I was a shaliach in Beitar, and I was a mefaked of Beitar Sydney, and I've been at many conferences where the official policy always was to support the government of the State of Israel. And if you don't feel you can support them, then stay neutral, stay out of it, but not come out against the government. And I don't believe there is a role. You know, they can come and say whatever they like to the Israeli government here, but I don't think airing that dirty washing in Australia does any help. I think where it hurts the most is the Jewish population there. You know, I'll give you an example of some obtuse rationalizations that I've seen from Diaspora Jewry. Many people talk about the threat of the demographic time bomb, and they give that as their reason why Judea and Samaria should be jettisoned, should be given away, should be divided. The country should be divided, like Solomon's baby. And this is, it's amazing. You've got Jews living overseas saying there aren't enough Jews in Israel, therefore we need to divide the state of Israel, therefore we need to divide Eretz Israel, but they're part of the problem. If they make Aliyah, then those demographic problems become less and less and less. And we've seen all these demographic predictions since 1948 and beforehand be disproved each and every day, each and every month, each and every year. The amount of kids, the happiness index here, the amount of kids that are being born, miraculous. The Aliyah now from Ukraine and Russia, the various different, the Jews, many more Jews coming from France and the United States and England. Our job is to make sure they stay here. But to complain a bit about Israel's demographic problems from outside of Israel, you want to fix that, you want to solve that, make Aliyah.
I want to show a pretty dramatic illustration of what Ari has been talking about. And you should be able to see on your screen now a social media post from Quds News Network. This is a Hamas-affiliated propaganda unit, and they've picked up Bob Carr, who has in turn picked up the words of Jeremy Liebler attacking part of the new Israel government. So that's the sequence of events. That's how the propaganda has been used, not just here, but worldwide, to undermine Israel from someone who's supposed to lead a Zionist organisation in Australia. I find that incredible. Robert, do you want to ask anything further?
Happy to, or you can.
Keep going, you're doing well.
Okay. So I wanted to ask what you thought of how the government has handled the judicial reform so far. Could they have done anything better? And at the end of the day, do you think they will end up passing, and in what form?
Actually, I'm a very big critic of the government and how they've handled the judicial reform. I'm very familiar with what the reforms and how important they are. But in terms of educating the population, the citizens of Israel, educating diaspora Jewry, educating the rest of the world, I think the country has done a terrible job. There were a lot of problems with doing that educating. For one reason, the Attorney General banned the Prime Minister of the country to even talk about the judicial reforms. And it took the passage of a law before Prime Minister Netanyahu could feel comfortable enough to actually go on a record to speak about the judicial reforms and why they're important. He has played a huge role over the last 15 years in being a very, very, very successful spokesperson, of course, Prime Minister, but the ability for him to explain why the judicial reforms are important and to a national audience and international audience has been sorely missed, I would say, for the first 3 months. Other than that, the Minister of Hasbara, their office hadn't been set up, no budget had been allocated to that. There were literally, it fell to the ex-parliamentary organizations, those NGOs that I was talking about. And we're talking about tiny organizations. There's one organization called Meshilut, which translates as governance. Simcha Rothman, the current head of the Constitution Committee, and one of the authors of many of the reforms with the Minister of Justice, Yariv Levin, he grew up in an organization. He found an organization called Meshilut that I work closely with, and they have an additional 1.5 people in that organization, and it was left to them and other organizations like Kohelet, which is actually a lot bigger, to start producing videos, information, get on the lecture circuit, speak in the media where they were invited. One thing that makes it a lot more difficult is that the media here, they are pure propaganda arms for the progressive liberal direction of many of the parties, center and center-left parties here, with and Channel 11, Channel 12, Channel 13 will not give a voice to explain the judicial reforms, but will give full voice to the voices against the judicial reform and against the government. The amazing thing is, and I hope that you're all keeping up to date with this, and it's really important, there is a new TV channel called Channel 14. And Channel 14 used to be called Channel 20. It's a private, like Channel 12 and Channel 13 are. Channel 14 is a private TV channel that has to follow very, very strict rules in terms of how it can be established, what programming it can do. They got a license eventually to do news programming. They had to move within an envelope of Jerusalem, and it was funded and founded by a guy called Mirashvili, who is a young guy and happened to have done very well in the Russian version of Facebook in Russia, and then sold out many, many years ago. The whole family made Aliyah. That's a story in and of itself. But he has been funding this Channel 20 that now has become Channel 14. Tens of millions of dollars a year it has been losing because it was doing a 0.5% rating, 1% rating, 2% rating, versus Channel 12, which has a rating between 10, 12%, and the other ones, let's say 8% and 6%. So they've been suffering at 1, 2%. The idea about ratings is that's how you charge for advertising time based on your percentage of ratings. They could never break even until they reached the 7, 8% level. What has happened with this new government is in 4 months, they have gone from 3% up to an average of 7%, and their top shows, one is called The Patriot, and the other is their news, are getting ratings sometimes between 9 and 12%. They are helped by the Prime Minister of the State of Israel, who before the election would only do his interviews on Channel 14, and since then has also been on the various programs. But we know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is excellent at what he does, but they do have fantastic news anchors and correspondents and talk show hosts that have done a fantastic job. And if anything has come out of this terrible education that the government has done about the judicial reforms, it has allowed for Channel 14 really to take that on, and so many more people are switching over to Channel 14 and getting the real news without the that left-wing liberal progressive slant of Channel 11, 12, and 13.
Well, that's really great to hear. Maybe we can set up an AIJAC interview with Channel 14. It would be nice to speak there. But if you're listening on AIJAC, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night with our guest tonight, Ari Briggs, and we're discussing current developments in Israel, and maybe David will tell us what's going to happen next week.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Can I please ask everyone who's watching this event, once it's over, do something to support AIJAC. This doesn't happen by itself, and we really need resources to do our advocacy and bring appropriate messages. So make sure you go to the website, jewishassociation.org.au, where if you're not a member, you can join, you can make a donation. Make sure you've subscribed to receive the emails as well. Next week, we have a very well-known prize-winning journalist, Richard Landes. You can see his book there, Can the Whole World Be Wrong? Lethal Journalism, Anti-Semitism and Global Jihad. So for those of you who are into political correctness, next week will be an event to miss. For those of you who are interested in truth and hearing an interesting and challenging perspective, don't miss it.
Okay, let's go to some audience questions. I think first up we've got Anne. Do you want to unmute, ask your question?
Hi, so my name's Nguyen. Recently I've just seen a news on ABC say that Hamas has launched rockets, and I'm familiar that Hamas have used human shields in the past. Why won't the media highlight how Hamas have used human shields in order to protect themselves from retaliation? And in terms of the regressive left, that's what I like to call them,
yeah.
I've seen them attack Jews, not just in NYC, but there was one recently here in Melbourne on Saturday when Avi Yemeni covered the neo-Nazi and communist protests. So why won't the media highlight these attacks on Jews in general?
Is that a question for me?
Because
in general, so
yeah, you know, I as much as I said I'm an optimist at the beginning of the show, and I am, but I'm an optimist about you know, being in Israel and the Jewish people. I'm not an optimist about convincing anti-Semites to not being anti-Semitic, and there are people in media all around the world who that's their play, that makes the news, that's what gets the ratings, and so I don't have high expectations from the rest of the world. Does that sound depressing? I'm optimistic about Israel's future. So as bad as the rest of the world is, you know, I think we have a very positive and future here. It doesn't mean that we don't try and get out our message. Doesn't mean we don't try and get our message the best way possible. Obviously, AIJAC is an amazing example of that. I do want to, you know, that we were in Poland while just happened to fly out just before the first missiles started flying, and well, before actually Israel took out the half of the leadership of Islamic Jihad in Gaza in response to missiles that had been the week before, and then started I think in the end it was 1,200, 1,300 rockets against civilian targets in Israel, with Israel continuing to try and limit civilian casualties in Gaza and try and take out the heads and deputies of Islamic Jihad. It was very much targeted Islamic Jihad. The Hamas had been told, if you get involved, you will face or the same fate as the leaders of Islamic Jihad. I believe they understood that, and they did stay out. As much as they said they were involved, they were not. And Islamic Jihad were begging for a ceasefire, you know, after very successful Israeli airstrikes based on extremely good intelligence. And hopefully that is going to bring back the deterrence that we lost for some time. Is there work to do? Every day in Judea and Samaria, our soldiers, our sons and daughters are going into Arab villages and capturing terrorists. And there has never been a more active time in doing that. And thank God we can do that. That's the difference between Gaza. We expelled the Jews of Gaza, we disengaged and withdrew from Gaza, and therefore today people don't even speak about. Things have to get so much worse to talk about soldiers, tanks going into Gaza. For now, all that can be done is from the air, and we see the missiles only get more accurate. Their range increases with every what we call round here. Whereas in Judea and Samaria, we're able to, that not one rocket has been fired from Judea and Samaria, because each and every night and during the day, our soldiers are in there capturing terrorism, collecting intelligence, and that is the difference between controlling an area versus not controlling an area.
100%. That's Reuben, you're next. Ask your question.
Reuven, you need to unmute that.
Hello. Can you,
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah. My question is, I get the impression that judicial reforms is a precursor to push forward with the sovereignty, area C, maybe B. What do you think about that?
Well, actually, the judicial reforms are a precursor to fixing many issues here in Israel. There is a great list of 50 issues that could have been dealt with. I know that it was on the Israel National News. I'm sure David, you know which ones it is. Israel 50 judicial reform. One of those, of course, is the issue of sovereignty, but it's not just sovereignty. I mean, one example is the Tully family. The wife and their kids were murdered because the Supreme Court did not allow the IDF to demolish empty buildings on the side of a road. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, terrorists hid in those buildings and shot this young wife and her kids. And that's just one example, but sure, how it enters every single area of Israel, whether it's social welfare, whether it's immigration policy, and of course the army, and of course Israel's sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. There were, Aaron Barak, who was, let's say, the lead instigator of a judicial coup that happened in the 90s here, came out and said that once these basic laws were passed, moved Israel from a parliamentary democracy to a constitutional democracy, but we don't have a constitution. So he said, well, this is the basic laws, and then made sure that all the rulings that he didn't like, he could disprove based on these basic laws, until Israel passed a basic law called the nation state of the state of Israel as a basic law. And then the Supreme Court took lawsuits against this and actually discussed these lawsuits. They did not rule against it. They had comments, but they did not rule against it. But if you can't claim something's unconstitutional and then start questioning that constitution if those are those basic laws. So there is a serious need for a reform, a judicial reform here, and it does affect every part of Israel, including sovereignty.
Helen, you're next. You want to ask your question?
Yes. Ari, you touched upon the demographic situation in Israel. Israel is the only country in the world where there is a first world nation with an increasing population. And that is true of the secular. They are having more than 2 children, the secular population, irrespective of the religious sector. Can you explain why?
Why secular people are having more than 2 children?
Well, in the context that they're the only first world country in the world that this is happening. Children are a big expense today, and Israel is not an easy country to live in, and yet they are defying the trend. Why?
Yeah. There could be, the answer could be so many different reasons. I mean, really, having come back from Poland, I think the Jewish people really believe they need to recreate 6 million worlds, and whether that is done subconsciously or consciously, I think the idea of rebuilding the Jewish people is something that Israel as a state took on from very early on, and the earliest leaders of the country spoke about the need. Today, the country also, those secular people now are having more kids than they ever did. I think that is because people generally have a good life here, even though economically it's tough. It's a small country, and it was based on labor unionists for the first 40, 50 years of its life. So we have monopolies, duopolies here, cartels, cement is expensive, products being imported are expensive. There is regulation after regulation after regulation, making things tough economically here. Now we're starting to move away from that slowly, and you know it started as early as 1996 with Netanyahu becoming Minister of Finance. And but even though in 1996 Netanyahu reduced subsidies for additional kids, so I think once you have 3 kids, it just increases, how would you say, in line and doesn't exponentially increase in terms of the subsidies you get. Secular Israelis are having more and more kids. Thank God we have 5 boys, so we're a bit above the average of the secular Israelis. And we have to say that all those wonderful Jews who live in Yud and Shomron, and it's about 600,000, their birth rates are also between 5 and 10. And so, but it really helps when our brothers and sisters in Tel Aviv are also having 2+ kids, families in Petah Tikva and all over the country. I put it down to happiness, that we're number 4 on the happiness index in the world. I put it down to and again, historically, time to rebuild.
Yeah, 100%. I think, yeah, whoever can should have a lot of children. It's very good. Next question, we have Mr. Cohen. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you, Ari, for your views on some of the issues facing the diaspora for how to react. Considering that there are many Jewish day schools all around the world, and also schools associated with shuls, do you think, and don't get me wrong, it's very important that we learn our history, our customs, and our language, but do you think that there's a place for explaining to younger people how to view Israel, how to speak of Israel, both within the community, outside our community, so that when they get out into the wide world, things like what you're talking about don't occur. Now, you look at America is a classic example why so many...
You have to get to the question, please.
Well, I'm just asking whether Israel could be involved in such a process would be very helpful.
Yeah, so first of all, I think, well, at least from the Jewish perspective, our diaspora Jews, the most important people to give a love of Israel comes from the parents and the grandparents. Australia has had is in a situation where many Holocaust survivors came with a natural love, unquestioning love of Israel, and that was passed to the next generation. We're already 3rd and 4th generation from there, and so that is becoming weakened, that impact. So it is important that the schools, I would say, the largest and biggest impact, and I think this has been proven by survey after survey, is visiting Israel on a program. The longer, the better. That is how, that is really the only way for Jews to be able to defend Israel on campus when they go back to Australia, the United States, on campus. I work with amazing organizations as well. There's one called a Reservists on Duty. These are usually lone soldiers who stay in Israel. They come from America, Australia, South Africa, Canada, England. They then make their homes in Israel, and while they're studying in university, they join groups of lone soldiers that then go and speak on campuses all around the world. I don't believe they've got to Australia, but they would love to have a group sponsor them to come and speak on campus. And let me tell you what they added to that. Not only is it great to have people with Australian accents or English accents, South African accents coming and speaking about Israel and how moral our army is and the ethics of the country, but they have added what I call only a Jewish twist. Only a Jewish mind could work out. They have minorities, minority groups, which means Christian Arabs, Muslim Arabs, Druze who speak Arabic, who join those groups, come to campuses, and they are actually directed at apartheid weeks. In America, there's apartheid weeks at very same campus. In Canada, I don't know if, I'm pretty sure it's probably come to Australia as well, but the ability to talk Arabic, representing Israel, having served in the army, Zionists who come there and actually say, well, actually, these Palestinian speakers have got it all wrong. They're lying to you, and this is why, and this is what I saw, and this is who I am, and this is why I support the state of Israel, and this is why I fought for the state of Israel, and this is that is extremely, extremely powerful, and we've seen that all around the world as well. So, you know, for Jews, come to Israel for as long as possible, learn about what's going on here, you know, get entrenched in what's going on here. But in terms of campuses, training, there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth. So bringing out reservists on duty, bringing out minorities to speak about the amazing things happening here in Israel is a very, very effective way of doing it.
100%. And yeah, some of these campuses I think are just so leftist that there's no hope for them. But on the edges, maybe there is, yeah, some hope to change things. Next up, we've got Jeff. Do you want to ask your question?
Shalom. May I offer very respectfully a humble criticism? You used the term progressive a couple of times, maybe 3 times earlier tonight, and if you use it as a sarcastic term, you should only use it once. But using it 2 or 3 times, it could become a habit, and you effectively give them gravitas in the world by the very nature of progressive. You should also be aware that around the time of Stalin, a bit before my time, I guess I'm not that long in the tooth, before my time, and indeed the socialists and communists and whatever you want to call them realized that Stalin was bad news and communism was bad news, so they termed the progressive term. So don't add to the glory of progressivism by actually using it more than maybe once a night. Have a wonderful time, and I thank you for your wisdom in all other respects.
Thank you.
There you go. All right. Next up, Aaron, do you want to ask your question? I think you just got to unmute.
Yep, he's unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me all? Shalom Aleichem.
Yes.
Hi, so basically, like, I would like to ask, like, is being Jewish like a race or an identity or like a ethnicity or like a culture? I would like to ask that question, and then I have something to share because, like, on May 13th, I actually attended an event which may be significant to the Jewish Association.
Okay. That's a great question, and it just so happens there's a very smart guy, a lot smarter than I, called Yehuda Cohen, and he has what's called Vision Mag. And I was listening to a podcast of his just last night when I was returning from Jerusalem, and he was on a interview on an Arab podcast, and he was asked that same question. Now, first of all, I think as Jews, we have trouble defining what a Jewish state is. We have trouble defining what a Jewish what a Jew is. His answer was, we're not a nation, we're not a religion, and we're not a people, but we're a civilization. You know, the Jewish civilization, so it encompasses so much. It's very difficult when people say, well, there's the Muslims, Christians, and Jews. It's very different, you know. It's very, Jews, I would say, or Jewish people are very different than Muslim people. How you would define Muslim people or how you define Christian people. Of course, there you could define them as a religion, but Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. But Jews is, or what? How do you define Jews? Is not based on their religion. That we have a Jewish state shows that we're a nation as well, but we're also an ethnicity. So we're so much wound up into the Jewish people and a history, 3,500-4,000 year history of being so many different things. We've been badly affected by being in exile for 2,000 years since the Bar Kokhba revolt of 135 CE, and that has changed the Jewish people. But we've had now 120 years of returning, and 75 years since we've returned to our natural state, being the indigenous people of this area. And we're a whole lot of things.
So basically, because like one of my friends, okay, though I disagree with him, like he says he doesn't support the state of Israel being created on racial heritage. So like Jews technically are not a race, they're more of a cultural identity, right? So because race is used to specifically categorize people based on genetics.
Before there were races, I mean, there was the Jewish people, before there were all these terms, nationalism, races, culture, there was the Jewish people. So that was, it's just beyond, we're not a, how did you say that about the state of Israel being a racial state or something like that? We're way beyond that.
Okay, next up we've got Emmanuel. Do you want to ask your question?
Right. It seems to me that there's a problem over there in Israel regarding it as a country for Jews or a Jewish country, and where we are giving, or the Israelis today, who are not religious, are giving ammunition to the outside world, that our only claim to Israel is for one reason only, and that's because of the Torah. So a person who doesn't believe in the Torah, right, essentially is saying that, yes, we invaded the countries, we invaded Canaan, and we did this, and bad luck to you, we won, and we whatever have you. But the only reason why it's our country is because the Torah said so, and for no other reason.
So I'll take the question as, do we have problems here in Israel? And the answer for sure is yes. And we have lots of problems, as I said, even defining ourselves. And what we want to see the Jewish state become. And I mentioned 2,000 years of being in exile, a very, very severe exile. We never lost hope that we would return. And even though we've returned and we've had our own state for 75 years, it's probably going to take another 75 years, another few generations. Our kids' will hopefully have returned to the authentic nation, ethnicity, culture, civilization and keep growing it, and which will allow us to be true both to our to ourselves and to our people. And I invite each and every person to come and join us to do that.
Very good. We've got a written question from Jason here. He's asking, do you think there's any appetite in Israel for a constitutional convention? If the basic laws were replaced by a constitution, would that rebalance the current tensions within the system of government?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, David Ben-Gurion actually, in all the documents on the establishment of the state, it said that within a year, they would approximately, I don't have the exact terminology, within a year sit down and have this constitutional commission and build a constitution. In their wisdom, they realized back then it was going to be difficult and the country was going through very difficult times. So they kept putting it off. I am a big believer of not pushing things to the future, pushing things under the carpet. The earlier you deal with something, usually the easier it is. I just think, and so is it possible? Is there discussion going on today? Yes, there are discussions about what that constitution would look like. There have been discussions for years. Is there a consensus? No. Is there, not a wide consensus? Could there be a majority formed on some sort of constitution? Possibly. I would say that the best way to start it, basic laws is a good way. The better way is to have a Bill of Rights. If you look at the American Constitution, the Bill of Rights ensures certain basic rights. And there have been complaints that maybe those are not enshrined as yet in a strong enough place in basic laws or in a constitution. So I'm sure we could agree on a set of basic rights, a Bill of Rights that would ensure rights as we expect. and then move on to further discussions of further adjustments or additions to a constitution. But I think a Bill of Rights would be the first way to go on top of the basic rights, the basic laws that have already been passed.
Very interesting suggestion. I haven't heard that suggestion made before. Now we've got a follow-up question. We'll just ask you to unmute, Mr. Cohen, over here.
Sorry, if I could just add something to your answer, Ari, about what is Judaism or what is a Jew. Rabbi Sachs described us as a family that started a long time ago. It has, like any family, it loses some people over time and gains people over time. It had rules given to it that has allowed that family to exist and a home to live in. And I think that might help that answer that other person as well.
Thanks for that.
Can't argue with Rabbi Sachs.
Never. Reuven, do you want the last go?
Yes, on previous question we've been discussing, and you're from Ari, you're from Australia. Australia is a constitutional monarchy. It's modelled on us because, and we're going to be celebrating the receiving of our constitution next week, Shavuot. Constitutional monarchy, the Torah is our constitution. We are nationality, and our king, the constitutional monarchy, is Hashem Melech, Hashem Echad. The Torah, our constitution, the first governors general was appointed by our monarch, was Moshe Rabbeinu. The first prime minister of Israel, the chief minister, the head minister, is Aaron, the Kohen Gadol. And so today we remain a constitutional monarchy also. Hashem's still the monarch, the Torah is still our constitution, and the governor general is being passed down from generation to generation. That's why we've got the song, David Melech Chai Chai V'Kayam, Mashiach ben David, he's our governor general. It should be revealed speedily in our day. It should be shown to Israel.
Yeah, as I said, a few more generations, and we'll return to that authentic view of Judaism. And but I do have to say that one of the reasons, and I've had so many discussions, and I'm on discussion groups and WhatsApp groups, and I have many friends who are out there protesting these judicial reforms. They're up to week 19. Some of them go to Tel Aviv, some of them go here in Renana. And I was very involved in the million person protest, which is a brand. It wasn't a million people. There were anywhere between 400 and 600,000 people in Jerusalem. And that was very successful. And that showed that really enlivened and reinvigorated the traditional people here and those that voted for the current government, because such press coverage of those every week of these protests. But what I wanted to say about the people protesting, some of them have been misled, but some of them really feel threatened. And whether it's right or wrong that they should obviously not feel threatened, but this is their feeling. They're feeling threatened. They're threatened by Judaism. I don't know if it's from guilt or someone said something to them or something they feel, or they just feel that Israel is a bit different than their view of a democratic European state or America or Australia, and it is. And they've been going in one direction. They're worried when their kids are asked to put on tefillin and they want to put on tefillin. They're worried when they're taught about Jewish history, about our heritage, because they're worried that that looks different than how they are. They're worried when their kids learn about the festivals. Our education system has done terrible, terrible injustice to generations here of Israelis, but even so, we're continuing to have a larger population growth. There's a return. There has never been more people studying, Jewish studies, Jewish subjects, Talmud, Torah, Nach, whatever you want to talk about. There have never been so many, and it's going to take us a few more generations, and we have to try and reduce the friction between our brothers and sisters here in Israel, and it's very important. We have to stand with our ideals. We have to ensure that we don't endanger the country or weaken the country in any way. but we also have to embrace those that should know better, don't know better, have some feelings that are misplaced. The best example was when those protesters were walking down the main street of Bnei Brak. They had helmets on, hard hats, because they were expecting to be pelted with eggs. And instead, those beautiful Jews in Bnei Brak brought them out chulant and came out with music and started dancing with them. And that was really a Kiddush Hashem. And really, that's what we're all here to do, is as much Kiddush Hashem as possible.
Well, on that very positive note, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Ari. You've given us a much better understanding of what are the realities on the ground in Israel, what's actually going on. So kol hakavod for the amazing work that you have done, that you're continuing to do. So just before we go, the L'chaim with Morris Klein is on now at 3ZZZ. And that's all we're going to have time for. You can keep up to date with what AIJAC is doing by joining our free email list at jewishassociation.org.au, as well as in our Facebook page, all our other social media. Our Instagram page just hit 1,000 followers, so make sure you're following. But everyone, have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again, Ari.
Thanks. Yom Yerushalayim Sameach. Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Ari.
Look forward to seeing you all here in Israel.